Imagine the captain of a Spanish galleon. He stands on the bridge in the middle of the Atlantic. The ocean is 106 million square kilometers of emptiness. Finding another ship here is like trying to spot a single firefly across the entire continent of North America. It's not just difficult, it's statistically impossible. The captain feels perfectly safe, and he is wrong. A dot appears on the horizon. It grows, transforming into a familiar silhouette. This is no accident. It is by design. How did a handful of pirates with primitive maps and no communication turn this aquatic desert into their personal hunting grounds? Was it incredible luck or a brilliant, calculated strategy? The answer will change everything you thought you knew about pirates. Because this wasn't an adventure. It was a system. And in just 2 minutes, you'll learn about the two paradoxes at its core. The first paradox turns military logic on its head. Why were heavily armed Spanish galleons, the true battleships of their era, paradoxically more vulnerable to pirates than small, almost defenseless merchant vessels? We'll reveal the answer to this question in the 6th section. The second paradox sounds like suicide. What compelled pirates to intentionally run their ships aground, far from civilization? This strange ritual seemed to guarantee their doom. But in reality, it was the key to their total dominance at sea. We'll uncover this secret in the 4th section. These two questions are not just riddles. They are the two key principles upon which their entire system was built. They show that pirates operated on a completely different, counterintuitive logic. This video is not just a collection of facts. It is a step-by-step deconstruction of a brilliant hunting machine. By the end, you won't just have stories. You'll have the complete pirate playbook. 7 key tactics that transform the image of a reckless rogue into a cold-blooded strategist. Your perception of a pirate will change. He will cease to be a swashbuckler with a cutlass and become a systems analyst, more like a startup founder or an intelligence chief. You will learn how they built spy networks, how they used the ocean's secret highways, and how their greatest advantage was hidden in plain sight. It's like learning to see in the dark. What once seemed like chaotic shadows suddenly takes on clear, predictable shapes. And the first element of this system began not at sea, but in the noisy, dirty taverns of port towns. How could pirates, thousands of miles from their target, know the exact schedule, route, and cargo of a galleon that hadn't even left port? It wasn't magic. It was total intelligence gathering. At first glance, the explanation seems simple. Pirates bribed officials and got sailors drunk, but this wasn't a series of random deals. It was a systematic, multi-layered network. It included merchants, disgruntled colonial officials, shipyard workers, and even governors' mistresses. Pirates weren't bandits. They were the heads of intelligence agencies. They obtained the most valuable information from the crew of a captured ship, conducting cross-examinations to filter out lies. This explains how they knew when a ship would depart. But their true mastery began with answering the question of where to wait for it. Pirates had no chronometers or accurate maps for determining longitude. Nevertheless, they operated with GPS-like precision. Imagine Captain Sam Bellamy in a Nassau tavern. He receives a scrap of information. The Spanish Silver Fleet will leave Havana next month. This information seems almost useless, but Bellamy isn't going to search for anything. He pulls out a map and begins not a search, but a calculation. He overlays the departure time with maps of ocean currents and seasonal winds, calculating the single possible route the fleet will be forced to take. He bets not on luck, but on inevitability, turning the ocean into a system of equations. Have you ever planned a route in your GPS to avoid traffic? Pirates did the same, but with the ocean. Why was information about the cargo more important to them than the number of cannons? This priority reveals their true nature. Pirates were not soldiers. They were pragmatic businessmen. They didn't hunt just any ship, but a specific asset, like an investor choosing stocks. The numbers show the true scale. Over 75% of all silver from the New World was transported in just 2 predictable convoys per year. This knowledge transformed a months-long wait from a gamble into a rational business strategy. Their intelligence allowed them to diversify risks. They knew which ships carried not only silver, but also cochineal, tobacco, or cocoa. This was their investment portfolio. But all this information was useless if you couldn't catch your target. Pirates knew what and when, but how did they solve the main problem? Where? In an ocean spanning 106 million square kilometers. The popular image is of pirates spotting a ship and giving chase. This is an illusion. In 99% of cases, there was no chase. Pirates didn't pursue targets. They intercepted them. For them, the ocean was not an empty space. It was structured by invisible forces. A pirate captain, having received intel, looked not through a spyglass, but at a map of currents. Their success lay not in the speed of the chase, but in the brilliant choice of an ambush position. The next section will transform your view of the ocean from a blue desert into a detailed map with highways, intersections, and deadly traps. Sailing ships couldn't just go wherever they pleased. They were slaves to the trade winds and ocean currents, like the Gulf Stream. These natural forces created invisible corridors that everyone was forced to follow. And when you overlay these corridors on a map, the Atlantic ceases to be a desert. Thousands of routes from Europe, Africa, and South America converge at just a few points. The Florida Strait, the Mona Passage, the Azores. The ocean becomes a network of roads with busy intersections. Pirates didn't need to find a needle in a haystack. They just needed to go to an intersection and wait. To them, the ocean map looked like a subway system with a few key transfer stations. But waiting was a brutal game of endurance. How could a captain keep dozens of cutthroats idle for weeks, staring at an empty horizon? That's a recipe for mutiny. But this wasn't a gamble. It was mathematics. The captain convinced his crew not with promises, but with numbers. The probability of encountering the Silver Fleet, which carried 75% of all treasure, at that specific point during a particular month was not just high, it was nearly 100%. The wait was not a risk, but a rational investment. Patience was as much a weapon as cannons. Pirate articles, like Bartholomew Roberts's 11 Rules, strictly regulated behavior precisely during these long waits. However, when the prize appeared, patience gave way to a furious race, the outcome of which was decided long before it began. Why did the Spanish Empire, knowing the danger, send its treasures along the same routes year after year? They had no choice. The cumbersome galleons could not sail against the wind and currents. They were slaves to geography. But the convoy system, created for protection, paradoxically made them even more vulnerable. Convoys moved at the speed of the slowest vessel, and their schedules were known years in advance. The security of the entire empire depended on a system that made it a prime target. The archives in Seville were, in essence, published schedules for robberies. But even on these highways, pirates needed one decisive advantage. On the horizon are two ships, a massive galleon and a small pirate sloop. Why did the sloop almost always catch it? A sailing ship's speed is a balance between wind power and water resistance. It seems to be all about design. But the reality concealed an invisible enemy, biofouling. Algae, barnacles, and marine worms covered the underwater part of the hull. In just 6 months in warm waters, they could reduce a ship's speed by 50%. Pirates turned this common problem into their unique advantage. A clean hull versus a fouled one was the difference between predator and prey. And the method they used to achieve this cleanliness was their most closely guarded dirty secret, despised by captains of the Royal Navies. It looked like a disaster. A pirate ship lies on its side on a wild beach, its crew swarming around it like ants on a dying beetle. This is not a shipwreck. This is the second paradox we promised to reveal. Intentionally running a ship aground. It was a ritual called careening. First, they would find a secluded cove and unload everything onto the shore. Cannons, supplies, every last cannonball. Then, they would run ropes to the masts and use capstans to pull the vessel onto its side, exposing its underwater hull. For several days, the ship and crew were completely vulnerable to a storm or a surprise attack. But the reward outweighed the risk. A clean bottom provided an advantage of 2 to 3 knots. In the age of sail, that was the difference between capturing a prize and enduring months of hungry searching. Why did huge warships, with access to the world's best shipyards, lose in speed to sloops that were maintained on the fly? Royal Navy ships also needed cleaning, but they did it in protected admiralty docks. The procedure was long, expensive, and required official authorization. The pirates' flexibility allowed them to perform maintenance anywhere, anytime. As a result, their ships were almost always in a state of peak efficiency. Meanwhile, a naval frigate on a long patrol would inevitably lose precious knots of speed with each passing week. Pirates treated their vessel not as a fortress, but as a race car that requires constant pit stops. You know that feeling when your car drives like new after a service? For them, it was a matter of survival. Imagine the scene. Pirates spot a rich merchant ship, but it's protected by a fast naval frigate. A direct attack is suicide, but for the pirates, it's still a promising target. With a speed advantage, the pirate ship doesn't attack. It shadows the convoy from a safe distance, like a wolf stalking a herd. This isn't passivity, it's active control. The captain can wait for nightfall for a stealth attack. He can wait for a storm to separate the ships. He can provoke the frigate into a chase, lead it away, and then return to the defenseless merchantman. In a deposition, one of Stede Bonnet's crew members stated, "A fair fight is for fools and the king's officers. We are here for profit." Speed allowed them to outrun anyone, but their next tactic allowed them to get so close to the enemy that speed was no longer necessary. What do a pirate ship and a theatrical performance have in common? Everything. Having achieved physical superiority, the pirates moved to the level of psychological warfare. At sea, a ship was identified by its flag, silhouette, and paint. This was its passport. And contrary to myths, the Jolly Roger was the last flag they raised. Most of the time, a pirate ship was a master of disguise. They kept at least 5 different national flags on board. They changed their identity several times a day, transforming from a Dutch merchant into a Spanish patrol vessel. Their crews were trained in the maritime rituals and signals of different nations to make the deception flawless. But how exactly did they use this maritime theater to approach a victim within firing range without raising suspicion? The key was not to look harmless, but to look predictable. A pirate ship, known to authorities throughout the Caribbean, could cruise trade routes for weeks because it wasn't a pirate ship. It was a complete change of identity. Flying a friendly nation's flag was just the first step. It was a theatrical production. Cannons were hidden behind false bulkheads, the paint was changed, and a mock cargo was staged on deck. In 1720, Bartholomew Roberts approached a fleet of 22 merchant vessels under a Dutch flag, exchanged signals, and moved into position to attack. No one suspected a thing until the very end. Imagine yourself on the bridge of a merchant ship. A vessel flying your flag approaches. You exchange standard greetings. Everything is according to protocol. But suddenly, at pistol shot range, reality shatters. False bulkheads drop, revealing 20 gun ports. Over 100 heavily armed men swarm the deck. The friendly flag is slowly lowered. The captain's terror is not that a battle is about to begin, but the shocking realization that it is already lost. In their testimonies, captives more often described not fear, but the humiliation of being so thoroughly deceived. And in that moment of psychological paralysis, the pirates would raise their true flag. Why go through all this performance if they already had superiority in speed and firepower? The answer? Economics. A battle is a direct loss. Their ship was their main asset. Any damage meant weeks of downtime and expensive repairs. Every wounded crew member was a lost specialist and a compensation payout. A pirate captain's success was measured not by enemies sunk, but by the profitability of the capture. The ideal operation was a takeover without a single shot fired. Deception wasn't cowardice. It was the highest form of professionalism. Pirate articles guaranteed up to 600 silver pesos for the loss of an arm. This figure proves how desperately they sought to avoid combat. Their goal was to make the enemy surrender before they even thought of resisting. What could be more terrifying than the sight of dozens of cannons aimed at your ship? The realization that they don't even intend to fire. The battle was won in the enemy captain's mind long before the first shot. Pirates didn't just rob, they built a brand. Every story of Blackbeard's cruelty, often exaggerated by the pirates themselves, was part of a calculated PR campaign aimed at demoralizing future victims. Their reputation worked like the rumble of an avalanche. The impact is still far off, but the sound alone paralyzes the will to resist. They found a way to package all this accumulated terror into one simple symbol. It wasn't just a flag. It was a visual ultimatum, an offer you couldn't refuse. How could the same symbol mean both salvation and a guarantee of death? It wasn't a threat, it was a language. A system of signals where color changed the rules of the game. The black flag was not a declaration of war, but a business proposal. Its message was simple. We are here for your cargo, not your lives. Surrender, and no one gets hurt. This saved gunpowder, time, and prevented damage to both their ship and the prize. But this system only worked because it had a ruthless alternative. The red flag, or bloody red, was not an offer, but a sentence. Its message was unequivocal. No quarter will be given. It was raised if a ship tried to resist. It was the threat of the red flag that made the black one so persuasive. This was a standardized negotiation interface, a universal language of fear and pragmatism, understood across the ocean without a translator. But for this silent ultimatum to work, it had to be backed by an ironclad reputation. And some captains turned building that reputation into a true art form. How did one man, Edward Teach, single-handedly paralyze shipping along the entire American coast? The answer lay not in the number of his cannons, but in the power of his personal brand. During a boarding, he would weave lit hemp fuses into his massive black beard. The clouds of acrid smoke and fire around his face created the image of a demon emerging from hell. But this wasn't a tactical maneuver. It was a strategic investment in his legend. This performance was designed for the survivors. They were allowed to leave so they could spread rumors of the devilish captain in every port. The numbers confirm it. Of the more than 40 ships he captured, the vast majority surrendered without a single shot. His reputation did all the work. Blackbeard was less a warrior and more a brilliant marketer of terror. It is this reputation that explains why the strongest ships were the easiest victims. So why would a massive, heavily armed Spanish galleon surrender to a handful of pirates? The more heavily armed the galleon, the more paradoxically vulnerable it was. On board were hundreds of soldiers and sailors, dozens of cannons, an impregnable fortress. But this fortress crumbled if you looked at their payroll. The crew of a galleon consisted of low-paid mercenaries. A common sailor risked his life for 8 to 10 pesos a month, guarding treasures worth millions. The pirates, however, fought for their own share, for their future. It was a conflict between a wage earner and an entrepreneur. Pirates weren't breaking through the hulls of ships. They were hacking the motivation of their crews. For the galleon's crew, surrender was the most rational decision. They were offered their lives in exchange for a cargo that didn't belong to them anyway. But even the most successful pirate, having seized the treasure, needed a place to cash in on his success. What happens the day after capturing a galleon? A ship packed with silver, but with a wounded crew, cannot enter a port. Every official port is a trap with a gallows. Pirates were declared hostis humani generis, enemies of all mankind. Legally, this equated them to wild beasts. Anyone could kill them with impunity and take their property. This made it impossible to get repairs, sell goods, or resupply. But the pirates were not outcasts. They created their own shadow infrastructure. They needed not just hideouts, but entire operational centers, shipyards, hospitals, exchanges, and banks, all in one. The survival of pirates depended not on their success at sea, but on the existence of secure land bases. These bases were the Achilles heel of their entire system. It was these that allowed for the creation of entire pirate republics, which became the logistical and financial hubs of their global operation. Why did the tiny settlement of Nassau on the Bahama Islands become the epicenter of the pirate empire? Its secret was a unique combination of geography and economics. Strategically, Nassau was located right at the intersection of trade routes. But its main advantage was its shallow harbor. The entrance depth was only 3 to 4 meters, deep enough for a pirate sloop, but fatally shallow for a 50-gun frigate that required at least 6 meters. However, Nassau was not just a fortress, but a thriving market. Dishonest merchants flocked here to buy plundered goods at below-market prices. It was a symbiosis. Pirates were the suppliers, and colonial merchants were the distributors, providing liquidity for their assets. But the social structure of this place was even more revolutionary than its economy. The most valuable commodity in Nassau was not gold or sugar. It was experienced sailors. The Royal Navy used press gangs to recruit crews, but pirates attracted the best volunteers. How? Their ships were some of the most democratic institutions of their time. The captain was not a monarch. He was elected by a general vote and could be removed at any moment. The plunder was divided according to pre-agreed shares. This wasn't anarchy. It was an attractive career alternative with a benefits package that no navy could offer. The compensation system was simple: 600 pesos for a right arm, 500 for a left, 100 for the loss of an eye. It was this concentration of motivated talent that made Nassau a prime target for the empires. How could you defeat hundreds of elusive ships scattered across the ocean? The British Empire found the solution in one man: Woodes Rogers. He was a former privateer himself and knew the pirate psychology from the inside, but his genius was not in naval tactics, but in strategy. He didn't chase individual ships. He struck at their operational center. On July 26, 1718, his fleet arrived in Nassau with an ultimatum: a king's pardon for all who surrendered, and the gallows for those who refused. This move shattered the pirate brotherhood. Over 600 pirates accepted the pardon. Rogers destroyed not the men, but their business model, depriving them of their shipyard, market, and sanctuary. The golden age of piracy ended on land. But at sea there remained masters whose primary skill was almost invisible. A pirate captain stands on a yardarm, peering at the horizon. There are 3 barely discernible dots. One is a galleon with silver, the second a merchant with lumber, the third a naval frigate. A wrong choice means either death or months of starvation. To the untrained eye, all sailing ships look the same from a distance. An attack seems like a lottery, but for an experienced pirate, a ship on the horizon was an open book. He read not only its silhouette, but also its body language, how it sat in the water, how many sails it carried, how it responded to the waves. This was the final filter in their entire system, weeding out unprofitable or lethally dangerous targets. How exactly did they turn this visual analysis into a precise science, allowing them to operate with the surgical precision of a predator? It wasn't a science. It was the art of reading architecture. At a distance of 5 nautical miles, nearly 10 kilometers, a 40-meter ship looks like an ant on a table, but for a pirate, its silhouette was like a fingerprint. In the 18th century, ships were not built from uniform blueprints. Each nation left its mark. Spanish galleons had high, castle-like sterns, while Dutch floats designed for maximum cargo were rounded and squat. This was the first filter. The second was the rigging. A warship carried more sails for speed, a merchant ship fewer for economy. A pirate captain saw not a ship, but a sum of its features. A high stern plus a full set of sails equals a Spanish military transport. But even knowing the type, how could you tell what it was carrying? The answer was in how it moved through the water. A ship laden with silver moved differently. It sat so low in the water that its waterline was almost hidden. Due to its immense inertia, it responded sluggishly and heavily to the waves, burying its bow deep. An experienced captain could see through his spyglass how the salt spray barely had time to clear the deck before it plunged underwater again, a sure sign of being overloaded with metal. But that was only half the equation. The pirate analyzed its behavior. If a ship sailed a perfectly straight course, not deviating from the optimal route, it was a vessel with a valuable cargo, bound by a strict schedule. He was reading not the ship, but the intentions of its captain. This intuition, bordering on the supernatural, was not a gift from above. It was the result of the most brutal training system in the world. Where did former fishermen and sailors get such knowledge? Many pirates were graduates of the Royal Navies, but that doesn't explain everything. Piracy was their post-graduate school. Every captured ship became not just loot, but a textbook. They conducted cross-examinations of captive captains, navigators, and carpenters extracting details about new designs, evasion tactics, and secret routes. This information spread instantly in Nassau. It wasn't individual genius, but a collective networked intelligence, a constantly updated pirate Wikipedia. Captured ship logs and charts were valued as much as gold. Each raid honed their collective muscle memory, turning the entire community into a single predatory organism. So, we have 7 elements: total intelligence, use of ocean highways, absolute speed advantage, the art of deception, a brand of terror, shadow logistics, and finally, the predator's eye. This is not just a set of tactics. These are the sequential steps of a deadly funnel, where uncertainty is eliminated and the chances of success increase at each stage. It is a single, fine-tuned mechanism where the output of one stage serves as the input for the next. In the following, final section, we will assemble all these parts into a single algorithm, the complete, step-by-step playbook of the perfect pirate hunt, which will transform your understanding from a set of facts into a coherent system. Let's assemble this playbook. It all starts with step 0, intelligence. The information network in port triggers the entire mechanism. Without precise data on the cargo and departure time, the hunt simply doesn't begin. This information activates the second step, choosing a position. The pirate plots the data on a map of currents and selects one of the ocean's choke points, turning a passive wait into an active ambush. Knowing where and when to wait gives him time for the third decisive step, preparing the asset. He careens the ship, bringing its speed to a maximum. The process of cleaning the hull could provide an advantage of up to 3 knots. In the age of sail, that was the difference between a guaranteed capture and a hopeless chase. These 3 steps turn the ocean into a chessboard where the encounter with the victim is not luck, but an inevitability. The preparation is complete. But how do you turn an encounter into a capture with minimal risk? The execution phase begins. Step 4, identification. Positioned at the ambush point, the captain uses his predator's eye to select the one valuable and vulnerable target from all passing vessels. This is the final filter, the decision to attack or let pass. Once the target is chosen, the 5th step begins, the covert approach. The pirates raise a false flag and disguise their ship to get within pistol range without raising alarm and giving the victim a chance to escape. And the 6th step, the climax, the takeover. The masks are off, the Jolly Roger is raised. This is not the start of a battle, but the final act of psychological warfare based on their brand of terror and the hacking of the crew's motivation. Captain Charles Johnson wrote that at this moment, a complete silence fell upon the victim's ship. It was time to make a decision. This isn't a boarding action. It's a forced change of ownership procedure. The prize is taken, but the cycle is not complete. One final critical step remains. The 7th step closes the loop: exfiltration and monetization. After seizing the cargo, the pirates immediately head for Nassau. This is not just an escape, but a return to their operational center for repairs, selling the loot, recruiting a new crew, and launching a new hunt cycle. It is this step that answers the main question. How did a handful of pirates defeat an empire? They didn't defeat it. They simply played by the rules of a different game. On one side, a flexible, fast, information-rich system of pirate entrepreneurs. On the other, the cumbersome, predictable, bureaucratic machine of the empire. The pirates dominated because their operating system was better adapted to the realities of the era. This is a story about systems. And in your own life, do you more often act like a pirate or an empire? So, after all we've learned, who was the more skillful strategist of their time? The agile, risk-taking pirate captain, relying on information? Or the powerful Spanish commander, following orders and managing a vast system? Type pirate in the comments if you think their adaptive system was the pinnacle of strategy. Or type commander if you believe that managing imperial power required greater skill. Let's discuss whose methods are more relevant today.